Hello, Adult Sunday School Leader. You probably noticed last week there was no video. Well, I'm going to tell you all about what's going on in my life after we look at this week's lesson. But I do want to thank so many of you that sent emails or left YouTube comments of concern or prayers for my situation. So anyway, let's look at this week's lesson. Now, you may know someone, or perhaps you are that person who has this mindset about their job or their church responsibilities, and it's this. This place, this job, this ministry would fall apart without me. Well, that's a great ego boost, but it's really a very poor strategy for long-term success of a business or ministry. Organizations don't need one key person that everything hinges on. What if that person takes another job, has an extended hospital stay, or even worse, they pass away? Then what? Let's use a family as an illustration. Let's say that there's a child that has a parent who does everything for them. Now, the child is totally dependent upon the parent. And that's great. That's okay when the child's an infant. But if that continues as they get into their teenage years, young adult years, the child's going to be unable to make decisions for themselves. They're not going to be able to cook a meal. They're not going to be able to pay a bill, pay taxes, all these things. What happens when that child's 30 years old? Do they still live at home and have that parent take care of them? What if the parent's no longer around? Then what? The child is maybe older, but they're not mature. He or she is left floundering around, unable to function. Now let's relate that to ministry. Let's say you have a pastor that does all the visiting, all the teaching, and must approve every decision. Well, that's really okay for a church of 20. But for that church to grow numerically, the pastor has to train leaders and share responsibilities, because if not, the church may survive to be 100 years old, but most likely they were going to remain small, and they won't be mature, and the pastor will probably be suffering from burnout. Well, we are continuing in the unit called Mentoring, Investing in Others. This is the second lesson called Moses and Joshua. The focal passage this week is Numbers 27, verses 12 through 23, and the point of this lesson is mentor and disciple those who come after you. So as we explore this passage, we're going to discover some valuable insights about succession planning, faithfulness, and the essential role of God in raising up new leaders. But first, let's just get a little bit of context of what's going on in our passage this week. In Numbers 27, the Israelites are just about to enter the Promised Land. Moses has been their faithful leader for 40 years, and he was aware his time was short, right? He's 120 years old at this point. So he approached God concerning the future leadership of Israel. Moses has shepherded, he has guided the people through the wilderness journey, and now it's time for him to pass on that mantle of leadership to a new generation. Our first set of scriptures is in verses 12 through 17. God told Moses to go up on a particular mountain and look over the land he promised he would give his people. God was telling Moses, you can see it from afar, but you won't be the one to possess it. You've led your people to this point, but I'm not going to allow you to enter. You know, these are the verses that Martin Luther King Jr. was referencing in his I've Been to the Mountaintop speech that was given in Memphis the day before he was assassinated, when he said these words. He's allowed me, he's talking about God, he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, I've seen the Promised Land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the Promised Land. You see, Dr. King was unable to see the fulfillment of his dream due to an assassin's bullet. But Moses was unable to enter the Promised Land because of an incident recorded in Numbers chapter 20, verses 1 through 13, which you probably want to reference and maybe summarize that story. Because Moses disobeyed the direct command of God, he was not able to enter the Promised Land. Well, let's make an important note here. Moses suffered a temporary punishment that might seem harsh to us, but it did not hinder his eternal reward in centuries of recognition as a great man of God. He's listed in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 28, in that what's called that Hall of Faith chapter. He was present on the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew chapter 17, those first 3 verses, along with Elijah and Jesus. So, Moses' time is winding down. He looked over, he caught a glimpse of the Promised Land, just as God said he could. But who is going to lead the nation from this point on? So Moses appealed to God to raise up a leader to take over his position. Let's note here that Moses did not assume that Joshua would be the next leader. We're going to see here in a minute that Joshua, he had been a vital part of Israelite leadership during the 40 years of wandering. But as we know from other Bible stories, God doesn't always choose the obvious person, does he? Like 1 Samuel 16:7, the last part of that verse says, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Well, our next set of verses are in Numbers 27:18 through 20. And here we see that God told Moses that Joshua would succeed him, and that passing of the torch was going to be an affair that will unquestionably install Joshua as Israel's next leader. Moses was to lay hands on him and commission him in front of the people. And so this is going to have no hint of Joshua seizing power from this 120-year-old man. No, this is going to be an official ceremony of passing the mantle of leadership from one leader to another. Well, let's remind our class here that Joshua had been in training for some time. We see in Numbers 11:28 that Joshua was an aide to Moses since his youth. And Joshua and Caleb were two of the spies out of the 12 who returned saying, yes, we can take the land. And you know what happened there. Unfortunately, that vote was 10-2, which cost the Israelites 40 years of wandering. But because of Caleb's and Joshua's faithfulness to Moses and to God, they were the only ones who escaped Egypt who were allowed to enter Canaan. And we see that in Numbers 26:65. Well, it appears that Joshua was a man of integrity, because we refer back to 1 Samuel, that 1 Samuel passage we read earlier. His outward appearance, what people saw, and his heart, what the Lord saw, obviously matched, and the Lord selected him as Israel's next leader. Now here we don't see a lot of one-on-one time of Moses mentoring Joshua, but what we do see is a relationship between the two over the decades. As Moses' aide, I'm sure that Joshua received instruction from Moses from time to time on what to do, how to do it. But now we see a big promotion for Joshua. He's moving from being an aide to the leader to becoming the leader, with the current leader's very public blessing. You know, heartfelt public affirmation is so important in affirming those whom you are mentoring or training or those who report to you. Remember this: praise in public, discipline in private. Praising in public, that encourages the individual and lets everyone know of that person's value in the business or ministry. You know, our pastor does a good job of bragging on his staff, both in business meetings and occasionally during sermons. Now, our last set of verses are in verses 21 through 23. Now, God used to communicate directly with Moses. Go into that tent of meeting and have that face-to-face conversation. But now, God's going to communicate with the priest Eleazar using what was called the Urim. And we're going to have to just admit here, we don't know what this Urim, or the corresponding Thummim was, or what that material was, what it was made of, whatever it was. This was what God was going to use to communicate to his people through the priest during that time. Well, Moses did what God commanded and publicly commissioned Joshua in front of the people. And you can read part of that commissioning over in Deuteronomy 31, verses 1 through 8. And as we have seen from the last two lessons, there are different aspects to mentoring. In last week's lesson with Jethro and Moses, we're given just one instance of mentoring. It wasn't an ongoing, intentional meeting, one-on-one over the course of time, but it was a single instance where Jethro, with fresh eyes, observed the situation, asked questions, made suggestions. In this week's lesson, we saw that Moses and Joshua had a 40-year working relationship, and the importance of public blessing and of the change of leadership. We also saw the importance of succession planning, or training your replacement. That ensures continued growth of the ministry. So, adult Sunday school leader, are you training your replacement? Do you have a teacher in training? Now, this is more than just a sub or even a regular sub. This is someone who can eventually take their own class and flourish. So if not, think about this. Be looking for someone who you can pour yourself into. They may not be ready to take that class, may not even be ready to teach yet, but you can usually see those diamonds in the rough that you can train. Now, occasionally, you want to allow them to teach, not just when you're on vacation, but when you're in class. This gives you a break, and it allows you to observe their teaching, which further allows you some fuel to guide them in the do's and don'ts, as you mentor them in teaching. So let's ask this question. What prevents us from training the next generation? You can tell I'm in the age category of baby boomers. Okay, my parents were in the silent generation. So in the late 1960s, early 1970s, can you imagine the silent generation, which you may be a part of, not being able to comprehend how the church, or even the world for that matter, is going to continue to function 20 years from then, with the next generation taking the helm, and they're nothing but a bunch of lazy hippies. Okay, that's where we are today. Okay, let me explain that. We baby boomers and Gen Xers, this is where we are now. We're wondering, what's the church going to be like when those millennials and those Gen Zers are completely in control? Well, let's think about this. For one thing, not all baby boomers were lazy hippies. Okay, some of us were just lazy nerds. Okay, so not all millennials and Gen Zers are self-absorbed and want a trophy for every little accomplishment. Okay, that's just a generic label that has been placed on them. And it may be true in some situations, just like lazy hippie may be true in some baby boomer situations. But here's what we have to do. We have to train someone to be our replacement, whether that's someone from the next generation or not, and then trust them and then transfer authority to them, just like Moses did. Well, that's all I have for you for this lesson. Now, if you want to hear about what's been going on in my world over the last week, stay tuned. Otherwise, don't forget to pray for and with your class. All right, so let me tell you about what's going on. So over Memorial Day weekend, my wife and I went to Oklahoma to visit some of her family up there in northwest Oklahoma. Had a great time, great visit. Came back the day after Memorial Day on Tuesday. Wednesday, we're in the church. It's kind of a catch-up day for me, just trying to get things caught up. And I was starting to work Thursday morning on my PrepTalk. Got a call from my mother early Thursday morning, about 7:15, which is unusual. Now, she lives it's about a 15 to 20 minute drive from us, not very far. But anyway, so she called me and said, hey, I have fallen. For one, call her neighbor who has a key, can come in and help her continue getting dressed. And then, so I went on over there and couldn't get her up. Called the EMTs. They got her up. Anyway, long story short, they took her to the local hospital. She had a broken femur right below the kneecap. And they put a leg brace on her and sent her home. Okay. But now she's in the bed. She can't really do anything. She was pretty much confined to a wheelchair most of the time. Before the leg break, she could stand, of course. That's how she was getting dressed. Transfer, go to the potty chair, stand up at the sink, those kind of things. But now she couldn't even do that. So she's just lying in the bed. And so my wife and I, from that point on, went over several times a day to check on her, change her, whatever we needed to do. But it was very tough. And she was starting to deteriorate a little bit to where she wasn't eating as much, wasn't drinking as much. The pain was getting a little bit worse. And so her doctor on Monday decided to admit her to the hospital. Okay, so we knew that was going to happen on Monday. But here's what happened also on Monday. I got up on Monday morning, and my wife accuses me of snoring. I don't know if that's true or not. So she sleeps with earplugs in. So every day when I leave to go to church, which is usually in the 6 o'clock area, I wake her up and have her take out her earplugs so she can hear the phone if something happens. And so I had her take out her earplugs, which she had a hard time doing. And then I asked her some questions, and she wasn't answering them quite correctly. Now, I had noticed in days before that she was really, really tired. And there was a couple of instances where the hand-eye coordination wasn't exactly right. And so I was kind of wondering if her ammonia level was sneaking back up again. So in case you don't know, she has stage 4 colon cancer. The metastasis is in her liver. And of course, the liver filters out ammonia. Okay, so with those mets in the liver, the ammonia level sometimes rises unexpectedly. Well, she takes medicine to keep that down, but I don't know if it was because we were on that trip and she was tired and maybe didn't drink enough and all that combined. Anyway, somehow her ammonia level crept up. And when your ammonia level creeps up, you talk nonsense, your hand-eye coordination is terrible. It's almost like you've had a stroke. That very first time we encountered this, I thought she had had a stroke. Anyway, all that to say, I had to call my EMT friend who came over and called the ambulance. And anyway, got her to the hospital. Then I got Mom to the hospital. So at one time on Monday afternoon this week, I had my mom in one ER room and my wife over in the other. Well, my wife eventually got a room upstairs. My mother got a room upstairs in another floor. And so got them settled. Was able to go home and get a lot of work done, just work around the house that evening. So Tuesday, I'm going back and forth between the two rooms, between Mom's room and Ruth's room, and checking on both of them. Anyway, later that afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, the doctor said, "Hey, your ammonia level's down. We're going to dismiss you." So I was able to take her home. Now, so she's home. She's doing great. I haven't had her out in the yard cutting the grass yet, but maybe. I don't know. Anyway, so Mom's still in the hospital, and she's going to be moved. I'm recording this on Thursday morning, so she's going to be moved to a rehab room sometime today, and we'll continue rehab there at the hospital, and then maybe go to a skilled nursing facility for additional care and rehab. Now, in the midst of all that, there's this question of what's Medicare going to pay for? And I've gotten several calls from the hospitals. Okay, they're not going to do this. Oh yeah, they're going to do that. And so it's been very stressful, to say the least. And I knew it's all going to work out one way or the other. And sure enough, it has. So anyway, I think that catches up everything. So Ruth is at home. Mom's in the hospital. We're able to get some rest. Everything's great. Got a prep talk video this week. What else could be going on? Well, one more thing. We've got Blast. Now, Blast is our VBS. We do our VBS a little bit differently here. Instead of doing like a week straight, we do every Thursday morning in the month of June for 4 weeks. So today, which is June 8th, today is the first day of Blast. So the kids are getting ready to commence to come to the building, and it's going to get loud around here. So that's why I'm recording this early before all the other voices are in the hall. So anyway, let's conclude this. I've rambled on far too long. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you watched this far, God bless you. I appreciate you guys very much. Thanks for your support, your emails, your YouTube comments, all that. I really do appreciate that. Take those to heart. Don't forget, pray for and with your class. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you.